Hi, everybody. I'm Candid Frank Stanisci. Here we are. We're halfway through the season. We're having our first Leaf Talk. And you like them apples? Welcome to the Spanglish World Network on Zingo TV channel 250. Please remember to download the Zingo TV app at the respective app stores for iOS and Android devices. Both apps are absolutely free. Zingo TV is available on Google Chromecast, Amazon Fire, Fire TV sticks, Roku sticks, and also on Smart TVs 2016 forward. Now on Leaf Talk, here we have Aaron William Freeland. And Aaron, it's been a while, but it finally happened. I guess it's funny. No, that saying, no matter, no matter how much things change, they remain the same. So this is a team that's made some changes, a new GM, a new coach, and they're fighting for first place in their division.
It's always been the same when it comes to the Toronto Maple Leafs. I'm not 100% sure what it is when it comes to this team, but somehow, some way, right around this part of the season, heading in towards the All-Star break, they somehow find a way to be near the top of their division. They find a way to be near the top of the league, and yet fans still aren't satisfied with how things are going.
And when you say aren't satisfied, you're referring to the people that follow the team.
Yes. No, for the most part, there's that whole trust the process thing, which is going on with the Toronto Maple Leafs.
That doesn't happen here.
No, it never
does.
There is
no such thing as trust the process in Toronto for any of their teams. We had a slight break in failure with the Toronto Raptors a few years ago. We've had it consistently with the Argos on a regular basis. Even if you go to the NLL, the Toronto Rock have not had a lot of really good years, but last year they were in the hunt. So I think Leaf fans are sports fans. I mean, people say, I think one of the sayings that disturbs me a little bit because it's true, and that is, this isn't a hockey town, this is a Leaf town.
You know what? Yeah, I can't say that you're wrong on that. More often than not, the other teams in Toronto seem to get left behind or forgotten about. The biggest example of this is the Toronto Argonauts. It's a franchise that's been around for 150 years. They're a team that has consistently performed. They bring home a championship roughly every 5 years, but yet people still either sleep on them or poo-poo them as being a minor league sport. And I understand it's not hockey. I get it, but it's just puzzling to me how this works.
Yeah, it is what it is. So anyway, our first show, I guess what we should do, normally we go through a whole ritual of things. We can do that in the framework of this is our first show. And you know what? This is around the time of the year where, teams establish what they're going to be. In other words, the GMs and organizations create teams and then they put them on the ice. They either succeed or fail. This is the time of year where the teams figure that they're not doing what they should be doing, where the experimental phase from within the organization starts to happen. In that context, what do you think, in looking at the Maple Leafs today, from training camp to now, what would you say were, these situations of note that can be expressed about the season as of how it started or how when it began and to where we are today? What are some of the notes that you would point out to people?
Well, one of the things that I've noticed, and this is one of the bigger things, is that they're no longer an easy win for teams that need one. It's slowly gone from being one of those pushover teams to one of those teams where it's a long night to play them. And it's never a fun night because almost anything can happen. And when I say almost anything can happen, the perfect example of this is actually what happened on Thursday night, or Wednesday night, sorry, when they were playing the Columbus Blue Jackets. Game started, the Leafs looked okay. I mean, they didn't look anything spectacular, but they didn't look that bad either. Come the end of the second period, they're down 5-0. Me and Mrs. were sitting on the couch, and it was a toss-up between that and Ottawa versus Carolina, or HGTV, and we actually went with HGTV instead because that was more entertaining than watching the Leafs game.
Watching a plant grow is more exciting.
Honestly, that day was the first two periods were tough to watch, but then the third period rolls around, and all of a sudden we're tied. The Leafs scored 5 goals in the third period to tie the Columbus Blue Jackets before heading to overtime, and I just one of those. Well, I did not expect that. That was not in my playbook. You know?
Well, I have to say though, Aaron, the Columbus Blue Jackets came into this game with a reputation of not being able to hold leads if they were lucky enough to have one. And the Leafs have been of note of starting slow. That's something that goes back all the way to Babcock. But they've lost that thing, the starting slow. But they haven't lost they beat the Rangers the night before.
Rather convincingly.
Right? 7-3. They beat the Rangers, and then what happens? The next game, they do that. But here's the thing. The thing I'll say about this is that the more Matthews and Marner do stuff, Matthews in particular, the more they do stuff that they impact on games, right? And the more they do it, I believe the more confidence they have that they can do it. And when you consider the lion's share of ice time is given to these two guys, it's kind of good that you have guys playing at their best. Those guys, I'm not here to dispute or argue about how important the bottom six are, but the top six are the top six for a reason. They have to perform because they're going to be out there more often. They should have the margin of play. Going into this season, the year started with the first two games. What was it? Matthews was on a pace of 120 goals or something, right? And so one looks at that and says, "Wow, what a great start for Matthews." And then he went then he went somewhere else, and now he seems to be coming back. But folks, looking back from December back to the beginning of the season, Matthews is doing what he does. He's not, he doesn't score a goal a game. He scores 3 goals one game, and scores none for the next two. So, he's almost a goal a game guy. The key here is they look okay. Not many people were sure the kind of team that the Leafs were going to be. Well, they've turned into, I joked at the beginning, the same team that's been playing for the past little while. But here's the thing, the most important sense that we all need. We need to understand, and Leaf fans want to know, and the management wants to know, is this team going to be ready for the playoffs? So we've established that they have one thing that's really important. During the regular season, they can put themselves in the playoffs without having to, at this point, struggle immensely to get into the playoffs. They're into the playoffs. They're second in their division. So they've done the important part before the playoffs. That is, try to give yourself the best seed possible to win the big cup, right?
Well, this is the other thing that you have to look at here. Somebody posted a very interesting question on social media the other day. Would you rather have a guy that is going to score 40 goals, but he only scores those 40 goals in 20 games and disappears the other 62 games of the season? Or would you rather have a guy that scores 40 goals at a relatively even pace throughout the course of the entire year? And this is a very similar situation here to Matthews versus Marner. Matthews is most likely going to score more goals, but he scores them in bunches. Whereas Mitch Marner is one of those players where, for instance, against Columbus, he had 3 points. Against New York, he had 3 points. Against the Islanders, he had 1 point. Against Ottawa, he had 1 point. Against Nashville, he had none. Whereas you flip over to Matthews, and he's scored 7 goals in his past 4 games, but prior to that, there was a dearth of goal scoring, and people start to wonder: is he washed? Is he done? Is he injured again? How can they capture more consistency from from Austin. Like, how can we get him to the same consistency level as Mitch Marner? Is I think an important question.
Well, he may be, but don't forget, Matthews is ahead of him in points. Not only goals, he's ahead of him in points too, as is Nylander. The thing that I will say, I'll take Marner out of this. We'll do one at a time. I'll do Matthews. Matthews has appeared to the past couple of years. I'll go even back as far as 3 years, where he has been more attentive defensively. So, in answer to your question, I'd rather have a 40-goal scorer who doesn't allow the other team to score on his line. That's what I want. It doesn't matter to me. It doesn't matter to me if he scores 40 goals in 20 games or 40 goals in 60 games or even 40 goals in 80 games, because at the end of it all, those goals that he does score will be a contribution to winning. But so will good defensive play. And when we talk about the playoffs, Aaron, we both know it's how a team plays defensively in the playoffs that makes a difference, that helps you move on.
Oh, for certain. It's when they are consistent on the back end, because I know everybody says offense wins games, defense wins championships. This is very true for the NHL as well. Just because of the nature of the game these days, the puck's more lively, the boards are more lively, the goalie equipment has gotten an inch smaller. It means there's more opportunities to score, and we're seeing a corresponding rise in scoring across the league. But at the same time, the ability to shut down the opposing team, which is, I think, why in the late stages of the game, and to sort of stop the bleeding, you saw Kampf and Bertuzzi taking more shifts out there to try to close things down. Eventually, this team is going to get to the point where hopefully everybody is as defensively responsible as they should be. And meanwhile, the big three or the big four should still be up there and consistent when it comes to scoring points. It's a question of, I think, finding balance.
Absolutely. And I'm going to ask you this. A phrase that comes to mind when I think of the Leafs in the playoffs, it's probably the biggest phrase that comes to my mind. The difficulty in which they have to overcome defenses and goaltenders to score, as opposed to how much easier it is for the opposition to score on them. Easy goals. I find with the Leafs in the playoffs, and I don't know if this is a Rubik's Cube that management and coaching has to figure out, where the Leafs sometimes look like a team that dominates the other team, but for some reason they don't have the finishing touch. And I think because of that, they leave themselves open to easier chances for the opposition, which takes us, this is basically in the list of things and why it's important that Matthews plays well defensively, not only scores goals.
Yeah, no, that is certainly true. I mean, they have become a team, and again, I mentioned this off the top of the show as well. They've turned into a team that it's very hard to play against, which is a huge change from the way it was in years past, when it was more freewheeling and there was less defense and they relied more on their goaltenders. If you look at the shot totals from the last few games, you're going to find that the Leafs have started to slowly bring it down. It's not quite where it needs to be yet, but they are improving in that regard. Now, I did actually want to mention a couple significant things that came out of their game on Thursday against Columbus.
Yeah, put them in the context of the season, then go ahead.
So the Leafs went out and they got snot, as it were. They signed Ryan Reeves. He was supposed to be one of those players that provided sandpaper and grit and was a bit of an on-ice policeman for the Maple Leafs, for lack of a better term. Unfortunately, it hasn't turned out like that. However, on the plus side, it's turned out that Ryan is actually a little bit more of a locker room presence and stabilizing influence, which has been rather interesting to see. The unfortunate thing is, it looks like they may have lost him for a significant period of time. About 9 minutes into the game, he caught an edge, and I've done this. I've seen it happen before. And he managed to ram himself toes and knees first into the boards and had to be helped off the ice. Some of the footage they were showing of him going down the hallway, it appeared like he fell. This means that now a lot of people are saying Robidaw Island and conspiracy theories. Oh, he took a fall and then he took an additional fall. But I've popped both knees before. It's not a lot of fun. I I do hope he will be able to recover and make an on ice reappearance for the Maple Leafs. But as it currently stands, there's going to be a little bit of space that's opening up for him. On the flip side, tough defensive play led to now, some people are saying that William Lagesson slew-footed Patrick Laine. Other people are saying he interfered. Regardless of how it happened, unfortunately, Laine is now going to be out for at least 6 weeks with a broken clavicle as a result of him going into the corner in the second period with Lagesson. So that is an example of, barring the injury, the Leafs' tougher play. Lagesson was right there with Patrick Laine to stick on him and not let him through. It is unfortunate that Laine managed to hurt himself or was hurt on the play, but at the same time, again, indicative of how the Maple Leafs have been changing their defensive strategies and have become one of those teams that you don't necessarily want to play against.
The play, when I saw it, I didn't watch it 9 million times. I just live saw the play. Didn't see it repeatedly, slow motion, all that stuff. It was, if you hate the Maple Leafs, it obviously requires a 40-game suspension.
Of course.
Obviously. I mean, there's no doubt about it. It had to be a 40-game suspension because the player got hurt. And if the player gets hurt when a Leaf does something, it's definitely a dirty play and it needs to be punished. The other plays that happen during playoffs, regular season, where Leafs get injured and guys do stuff that is worse than that, they don't even get a penalty. But in this case here, in this situation, it was a borderline. I don't know if it was because you're right. The way you described it is perfectly. Was it a slew foot? Was it interference? It was a bit of both. And unfortunately, the bit of each of them doesn't rise up to a penalty or a suspension because, very gray area. Let's be clear. If they call that a penalty or a suspension, there'd be a lot of work to be done. A lot of paperwork would be necessary from that point forward. But here's the thing about the Leafs, and you talk about the grittiness, and we talk about the lack of success that they've had, and they bring in this big tough guy, and the first, I'll say, quarter of the season or a little bit less. Why is this guy on the team? What's he doing on this team? He's terrible. Goes on the ice, and I mean, he's plus minus of minus 47. And he's only out there for 4 or 5 minutes a game. So this guy's doing a lot of damage in a very short time. In essence, it's very easy to take a player like that who doesn't rely as much on his talent as he does on his intensity. And, I think, one thing we know too as well is that playing for the Maple Leafs has additional challenges that aren't there with other teams, which I think means that no matter how good a player is, no matter how average the player is, it's not just about being on the ice. It's about what happens off ice in this town that makes it a challenge. We saw the cowardly act of O'Reilly, who admitted, nah, I don't want to play for the Leafs. It's too much pressure. I feel like I have to work harder than the other guys on the other team. Those guys in Florida, they go to the beach, they go with their families, they sit in crowds and nobody knows who they are. I kind of like that. Well, good for you. But with the Leafs, you've got to play 2 games. You got to play the on ice one and the off ice one, which is why we've grown to realize, those of us who are critical of Nylander, justifiably in some cases, unjustifiably in others, have grown to realize that this guy has the kind of mentality that makes him a perfect Maple Leaf. So the beginning of this season, we saw Nylander play really well in the playoffs. To this point, he hasn't disappointed. if I can shift the conversation to Nylander, who has done more than people expected, rests in a place in the league, we're top 20 player in the league. He's there ahead of Matthews and Marner. I mean, what else do you want from this guy?
Honestly, I could not ask for anything more out of William Nylander. That man has been absolutely spectacular. Um, you know, I think he had 9 points in the past 5 games. So that is something you definitely need to consider when it comes to what's going on here and whether or not the Leafs are going to be able to resign him. As sad as it sounds, this dude may be playing himself off of the Leafs because he's playing too good. Now, the good news is the salary cap is supposed to go up to $87.5 million next year. So that is a bit of a relief. And the Leafs are still over the cap. Their projected cap hit right now is $97.19 million, and they're projected to use $13.7 million worth of LTIR space. So at this point in time, it's kind of a good thing that Timothy Liljegren, John Klingberg, Matt Murray, and Jake Muzzin are all currently on long-term injured reserve. Klingberg has his hip issues. Liljegren had that non-call from Brad Marchand, and
Exactly.
Mark
That was
Giordano
a slew foot. It wasn't. It was. There was no gray area.
Oh no, it was very obviously a slew foot. How that doesn't get called is, I think, as a result of the fact that Brad likes to give referees signed sticks for them to bring home to their kids.
Well,
I'm not necessarily a conspiracy
is a little
theorist.
different for the Bruins. The
Yeah,
Bruins
well,
Bruins don't get the same kind of fish. They get a lot of leeway. I don't know of a team more that the league didn't suspend, and the phrase that comes out is, "Well, he's not really that kind of a player."
yeah, that's
That's
like
the excuse for not suspending him. Bruins.
that's like the government saying, "Don't believe the sights of your eyes." Who are you going to believe, me or your lying eyes?
Do I hate the Bruins? No,
No,
but I'm
of
going to
course
call
not.
it the way I see them. I mean, it's just the reality. So yeah. So you're right, and Lindgren's out for a very long time.
Yep.
So clearly injuries don't matter when a player commits a foul and doesn't get a penalty. There's no reason to punish him at all during the act, after the act, or impress upon him he now has a reputation. That's not going to happen with the Bruins. That's not going to. It'll happen with the Leafs. That's why the Leafs have to trade players. How many players have they had to trade away in the history? Just a recent memory, the one that you'll remember. Ty Domi literally had left because they couldn't afford the penalties that he was getting. Right. We've seen he's in Edmonton now. Sorry, now I'm drawing a blank. Played on the line with played with Marner and Matthews, and he's in Edmonton now. He was getting penalties in the playoffs, and the Leafs let him go. We have another guy that just went to Carolina. He got too many penalties. He got let go. So this is how I feel I can substantiate, my point, that you get players who are questionably either ref friendly, right? They can't play on the Leafs. That's why I had one foot on the. You can't bring Reeves in. You bring Reeves in, he's gonna, And I think that's part of. And that again, like I said, being a Leaf is a little more difficult. You're really under the magnifying glass, and I really think it's true. I don't care what anybody says. I'm going to stick to it. That the Leafs are a team that if they have to be almost perfect, not just because of the fans and the way they play, but also how they play on the ice. And I attribute it back to the Philadelphia thing when the Toronto government, the Attorney General charged the Philadelphia Flyers. I think the league still holds that against them.
It wouldn't surprise me. And you're right when it comes to players that we had to trade away because of their penalties. There's Cody Ceci, who's currently with the Edmonton Oilers, who's playing defense for them. There was also Kadri that we
exactly. Thank you.
we got rid of. Not to mention Michael Bunting, who after a
Exactly.
certain point a few seasons ago, who's currently with Carolina, couldn't get a call. Um, it's players like that who are otherwise good, just the league has finally keyed on them, and
And
there's
I
no
think
way
it's
for them
only
to.
because they play for the Maple Leafs. The Leafs lost to Florida last year with all kinds of stuff that should have been called. And injuries, injuries happened. I know this sounds like Homer talk, but all I can say is I don't care. For those of you that hate the Maple Leafs, I'm not a big fan of people who hate the Maple Leafs or put up with anything from the Maple Leafs. Those two groups of people I'm not a big fan of. I like watching the game and comparing the decisions I make to the decision that the team makes. And I'll stand behind everything I've ever said about the Maple Leafs, especially with the Big Four. Um, the reputation that they've built in my mind early on was it's about me, me, me. I want to be paid. I want to be paid like I'm going to be the best player in the league. I know I'm not yet, but I'm going to be. So pay me like that. That was my beef against the Nylanders, the Matthews and Marner. So now what you got is you got Matthews trying to earn his keep. You got Marner doing the best he can. He's being a little tiny bit more physical. He's actually the odd time he finishes a check, which is great. And Nylander's just the guy that unfortunately you want to talk about an island. He's on an island in his own mind when he's playing hockey. It really doesn't matter what's going on around him. He's going to play the way he plays, and usually it's good.
Well, and that's evidenced by the fact that he does have 9 points in the past 5 games. I mean, dude is absolutely on fire. He has 38 points in 27 games played so far this season, as compared to Matthews, who's supposed to be our overall go-getter, who's got 35 in the same number of games. So, you look at everything that's going on here, and you look at what William is doing for himself right now, and it certainly seems like he's not top in points, he's not top in goals, he's not top in assists, but he's certainly up there. You know, I mean, he's right 1 point behind Quinn Hughes and tied with Elias Pettersson, who is supposed to be the next wunderkind for the Vancouver Canucks. So hey, he's situated himself very nicely in a contract year for a very big payday once there's more cap room.
He, I guess I'll put it this way: he he looks less and less if we go back and project from a couple of years back till now, and from the beginning of the season till now. What he's established is that he trusts his other teammates to play defensively a little less. The problem for him was he trusted his guys defensively a little bit too much. Look back at the defenseman and go, so you're going to get this guy? He's already in front of the net. That kind of stuff. And I don't mean that in a negative sense. I truly mean it in a constructive sense. What I'm saying is he's still not perfect defensively, but he is working a little harder. And as I said, trusting, expecting his teammates to do that part of the work, in my opinion, is what he was early in his career. Now he seems to be taking a little more interest in that, which is a good thing. We've got Matthews, who we can see clearly he's trying to be like that more, and we know that Marner is relied on defensively. He does a lot of penalty killing. Well, when they're 5-5, that's not his job, but he does a lot of penalty killing, so they rely on him defensively. And I think everything that we've talked about when this season started till today, if we talk about the defensive play of those three players, much better than it's been in the past.
Yeah, and it's been a sight to behold. Honestly, the fact that they're more defensively responsible, I will take over the fact that they don't seem to be, as offensively minded. Haha, says he after William Nylander has 38 points in 27 games.
There you go. and you know what? Let's talk. Those are the main players. Let's talk about coaching. Coaching matters. It's an important function of. Get my clock here so I know what's going on time wise. The coach, I'm convinced. You said it before I believed it. I was open to it. Not that I wasn't open to it. He is one of the best coaches in the league. I think he's proven it. And nothing proves it more than the change in general manager, the constant evolution of the team or devolution of the team. Depends which way you want to define it, but either way, it means lots of change, and he handles it. He handles it. I apologize. Sorry about that. He handles it so well, and we talk. It's ironic, really. What's the team known for? The Maple Leafs over his tenure as a coach, their inconsistent play. But is there anybody on that team that's contributed to a good consistency more than the coach?
And here's the thing that a lot of people don't seem to realize is that Sheldon Keefe has one of the highest winning percentages, or had one of the highest winning percentages in Maple Leafs history. So far this season, the Maple Leafs have won 55.6% of their games. And here's the best part, they've been getting points in 2/3 of those games. So of the 27 games that they played so far this season, with the eligibility for 54 points, they have 36, which to me is one of those, wait, really? Sort of moments, because as soon as the Maple Leafs lose a game, it's, oh, fire the coach. Oh, get rid of this person. Oh, get rid of that person. Calm yourself. Like, the Maple Leafs are still winning more than half of their games. Granted, even strength wins are a bit of an issue, but they're still getting points. And at the end of the year, they don't ask how, they ask how many. And as it currently stands, the Leafs find themselves sitting second in their division, 8th overall in the NHL. And that to me is an indication that we're currently in a good place. I mean, nobody's currently going to be able to catch Boston. They've got 40. Currently, I said currently.
I'm gonna push back a little bit there, buddy. They're only there. They're only a few points ahead of the Leafs. Even the Leafs could challenge them for first. Anyway, sorry, I just couldn't resist that, because I really do believe that this is a team that the Leaf team that has proven one very important point. Up until that game against the Rangers, I think they played like a vast majority of their games to a 1-goal win or lose. Mm-hmm. And we know how many overtimes they went through. We know how many shootouts they went through. So this is a team that's in every game, literally, figuratively. And because of that, they get that almighty third point that didn't exist back in the day, right? Because if you lose, in overtime, you get 2 points. If you win in overtime, you get 2 points. If you lose, you get 1. So it makes it kind of hard to talk about percentages of points over a season, because you have that extra point in there that makes being a 50% team before this third point thing is a lot different than it is today, because you can have 50 games, 50 points, but that's really not that good. It's not as good as it sounds. It's fool's gold, because really that means you're losing a lot of points, because there's that third point. So what the Leafs do is they play a close game. They're getting a lot of experience, and more than most teams that I don't think have had that many close games. They're accustomed to doing that. Even games that they're totally out of, they figure out a way to get back into the game. We saw that against Columbus. So, this is a team that can score at will. But the one statistic that I look at, and I don't really have an opinion on it, but I'll ask you, how important to you is plus minus? Like, the Leafs don't have a guy in the top 30 of that, I think, or something like that. Is plus minus a factor, do you think, or is that a statistic that?
Well, I mean, it's more of a personal statistic than it is a team statistic. It can help a coach get an idea of roughly where a player stands when it comes to certain things. Like, this guy is a minus 17, let's say. Why are they a minus 17? Well, let's take a look at the quality of the opponents that they're facing, the type of opponents they're facing, when those goals happen. It gives you an opportunity to do a slightly deeper dive. In the same way that kind of goal differential serves as a way for us to take a look at a team and figure out how they're doing and what's going on with them. It is a useful stat, but it's a limitedly useful stat.
To concentrate on the plus minus, basically what you said, and I'll put it in terms that I think I understand what you said, and that is that if you play in the number one defensive pairing, you're playing against the best players on the other team. If you're a number three, you're not playing against the best players on the other team. So there's a built-in factor that the plus minus doesn't, that doesn't show. That there is no way of parsing the difference between the guys that are playing in really important minutes against teams' best players and the guys who are just trying not to create a negative. Because to me, that's what we're talking about, right? So there's going to be more negatives on Morgan Riley's side than there will be on Lagesson, right? Because Lagesson just has to play well against players that, like him, aren't top six, right? So that's the important thing to why I really not a big fan of plus minus, and I think maybe also some players actually may take that too seriously, and it might affect their game. Because let's be clear here: if you're worried about plus minus and you're playing on a line and your line has a lot of minuses, you're not the only one. So you're carrying other. It can be that you think you're carrying the other guy's problems.
And I think the real the other thing that you have to bear in mind too is those moments where the 5 and 6 defensemen get stuck against the first line of the opposing
Yikes.
team. That's where the minuses tend to pile up, and you get into desperation mode when you're just trying to not get scored on.
Yeah, there isn't a consistent set of data or information that accounts for the imbalance of the opposition that you're on the ice against. It can't quantify that. So it's, so for me, I guess with them we agree that plus minus is kind of it's okay, it's a statistic. You're welcome.
It's fun as a personal stat, but it's not necessarily all that key when it comes to the overall scheme of things and like sabermetrics and all of this expected goals for and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Again, like I said, one of the bigger things that I tend to look at when it comes to these sorts of things is goal differential. Because
that's the team stat.
That's the team stat, which is one of those. Hey, they're scoring more for them than the bad guys are scoring on them, and so far, it's interesting to see that Ottawa has a positive goal differential in their last in their division, and they're currently barely out of last in the league. Chicago is currently at a -38. Anaheim's at a -26, and San Jose is at a -54.
But they're places that they belong. First, I want to finish up the thing on the plus minus. Just one little comment: there won't be any trophies being handed out this year for best plus minus. So that should be your first clue. So yeah, you're right about what you just said.
Although, the Selke plus minus best.
Well, the Selke, no, I think there's a nuance there with the Selke where a player by himself establishes a reputation and creates defensive plays that are, reporters watch every game. Whether they watch every game of every team, that we can discuss that. We all know that there's always the situation where players are awarded, credit, a lot of them because they play in New York, Toronto, Montreal, all those lovely places, Los Angeles, because there's more reporters in those towns. So there's more eyes on that team. So when a guy plays really well, that means more people are seeing it and more people probably vote for them. So as far as the best defensive player on the Maple Leafs, I know who wants to be the best defensive player. That's Austin Matthews. Who is actually the best defensive player on the Maple Leafs? I truly believe Camp's the guy they signed because of that, because they believe that. But he's not been, he's had some really good offensive nights, which we didn't expect from him, right? You don't expect from him. But he's had some terrible defensive nights.
Every once in a while, it seems like he gets a little bit of cranial vapor lock when he gets inside his own blue line. It happens. I get it. I mean, the fact that he's had 3 goals in the past 5 games was an additional bonus, including that rather selfish empty net goal that he had in New York when he
Hat
could
trick.
have dropped it to
Hat trick.
Austin for the hat trick. But I understand him not doing that.
Well, you know what? That's I kind of think that's the problem with the Maple Leafs, that they're not like that enough. They need to be more selfish. Sometimes I think well, if I were to ask you on a sliding scale, selfish being selfish and generous being generous, the Leaf team is a very generous team. They make plays that I sit there and go, you could have shot the puck. You didn't have to pass through 3 defenders. You could have taken a shot, and guess what? That puck, if it bounces and comes out again, that guy you think about passing to, he's going to have a better shot.
and I hate to bag on the dude, but that seems to be Mitchell Marner's problem. Dude has an absolute rocket of a wrist shot. He's been working on it a lot. His one-timer has come a huge way in the past 2 to 3 years. He's one of those players that could definitely be a sniper, but he's played so long in the feeder mindset that he's always looking to pass, and it's like, nah, Mitchie, you had half of the net. Why did you put it back through 3 different players to try to feed Matthews in front? Just no, take the shot.
Yeah. Well, you know what? His on one knee at one-timer has really improved this season.
Yeah, that is one of the biggest things in his arsenal right now, is the fact that he can absolutely rifle it when he drops to one knee to take the one-timer.
And so many players who do that. Stamkos is one. They're all out there. They have that one knee on the ice shot that they can really control. Very necessary in the playoffs, and that's, I guess. We're winding down on time, so we got a few minutes left. From the beginning of the season till now, what do you think? We grazed on it a little bit. What do you think of the Leafs playoff structure?
Based on the fact that they actually managed to win a series last year before getting absolutely choked out by the Florida Panthers, I think they're in a much better place when it comes to playoff structure. The fact that they've made themselves during the regular season a much more difficult team to play against leads well to them being able to carry that over into the playoffs. So not to overstate the importance of a good start, but the Leafs have foundationally now have something in place where come the playoffs, it will serve them in good stead.
I think the most important thing in as far as playoff structure is concerned, there is a mentality on the Leafs now. You referred to it as snot. I can refer to it as belligerence. I can refer to it as, no, you're not allowed to do that. And here's why. Unfortunately, that's, if there's nothing else in the playoffs that the Leafs have done poorly consistently since Marner and Matthews and Nylander have been on the team, they have not been able to create an atmosphere that makes other teams think that intimidation isn't going to work. And I understand early the thought was, let's punish them by scoring power play goals. What have we learned in the playoffs with the Maple Leafs and their power play? What have we learned over the past couple of years?
It never hits the ice.
So that they've gone to that well. My point is, they've gone to that well enough times that, the definition of insanity, keep doing the same thing, you're still going to get crazy. So now I think that's where we didn't talk about the GM. We only have a couple of minutes. This is the difference between the previous GM and this GM. This GM comes from a place like Calgary, which a very physical team. It was his team, so we know he had some input into that. So now he comes to Toronto and he decides we're going to do a little bit of that too, which they paid. As we talked, Reeves was his plus minus was, well, his minus was, it was a lot. But that's an investment. Having him on the team is an investment for the playoffs. Unfortunately, the Leafs over the past few years have not been able to find a Ty Domi type, or a type that can play and be physical. And that's the thing. That's the thing that I think is the toughest part about bringing in tough guys. Can they play? Because they have to play. They have to play the game too. They can't just be tough guys. Because nowadays, we can go 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 games without a fight in the game.
No, it's very true. The gone are the days of the gentleman who just went around beating people. They now have to be able, and I mean, to a certain extent, I'm going to use a weird example here, but to a certain extent, Marty McSorley was one of those guys who not only could fight, but there was a certain amount of playmaking ability there.
Exactly.
There were flashes of offensive brilliance from him, but he could also cave your skull in with his ring finger. Most of the players these days are evolving to be better at that sort of thing.
And now what has to happen is they have to be able to play to do that kind of stuff. And, that's why Wilson's a big, everybody talks about Wilson, that, the truculence and talent and ability to score, makes him really important. What the Leafs, it still has to be the thing that they really, I think they need to do, but for some reason, I don't know if it's fear or maybe their coach says, don't take a stupid penalty, so that when a player roughs up one of the Leafs don't go and straighten the guy out. I guess I'm really not sure if it's fear, and I'm sorry if I'm using that word and it's too much, or just they don't want to get a penalty, and the coaches insisted on them that, and the organization says, we're not taking those kinds of penalties. But it opens the door to I think an opportunity for teams like Florida last year. They won that series just strictly based on intimidation. I mean, look what what's his name, Radek.
Radko Gudas.
Yeah, Radko Gudas, when he stood over Samsonov and basically said, "You don't get away with that. You shouldn't get away with that. Not on your goaltender." And that was a terrible sign.
Why? And here's the interesting thing. I know a lot of the times we complain about the Maple Leafs. I'm still trying to find the website, but it's eluding me for the time being. When you look at power play opportunities by team, and this statistic is out there, the Maple Leafs are consistently in the bottom half. Consistently. They don't get penalties called against their opponents all that often. And this seems to me to be indicative of game management. I know the NHL says that they don't do it. I know the officials claim that they don't do it. But pay no attention to what this hand is doing, because this hand is just taking your wallet. The Maple Leafs, unfortunately, are one of those teams where when it comes right down to it, don't get as many power play opportunities as maybe they should. Now, and I remarked about this the other night, I said, hey, imagine if the Maple Leafs got all the power play opportunities they should. And within 30 seconds, the Maple Leafs had scored on the power play. And I was like, well, that shoots that theory out of the water.
Yeah, no, it's I know it's hard to convince people that that's the case. I always said, and I believed over the years, and it's becoming less of a factor. But back when all the referees were Canadian, I think there's something to be said for overcompensation. In other words, because I live in Toronto, when I come to Toronto to ref, I got to make sure I don't show that I'm, a homer. So sometimes the opposite happens in that case. So, but now that referees, that shouldn't be an issue, because now referees come from everywhere and, all across North America. And I believe the odd one from Europe. Things should, that kind of situation should not be a factor. Now it's just a matter of political stuff where you'll get the passive aggressive thing goes, now listen, we know that he's a rat, but you can't penalize him just because we know he's a rat. So in some cases that means they get away with stuff.
Well, here's hoping this eventually turns around, but I have faith.
But faith is an important thing that you need to have. And I'm glad you have it, Aaron. And I think it's a good thing that that it's something that you have. Faith is, faith. Okay, in the Leaf fan context, faith is hope. Hope is faith. Leaf fans have a lack of faith, but I kind of like the fact that the Leafs played that kind of game and their fans booed. On a final note, the fans are not just taking what they offer and accepting it, for whatever it is, right?
Mhm.
There's pushback from Leaf fans. That's not something they're well known for.
No, this is very true. It's not something they're well
The
known for at all.
criticism's a different story. It's that I'm parsing something. I realize that, folks. But what I'm saying is, the Leaf fans, when the team actually sucks, the majority of them go, you know what, you suck. Back in the day, they wouldn't do that. And ever since they threw their jerseys on and sent the message that, you know what, and I think Leaf fans learned, I think people in this town learned that, you know what, if you really, don't buy tickets, or if you do things that make the organization, the team feel like you're not going to support them, and I mean financially, changes will happen. And that's when the last biggest change happened.
Well, looking forward to tonight's game. I'm looking forward to seeing Sydney in town. And as we sign off for the day, I did actually manage to find that particular website, Frank. I will send that to you by direct message.
Okay.
And we can talk about that next week when it comes to this sort of thing, if the Leafs are still in roughly the same position.
Well, thanks, Aaron. I really appreciate what you did today, and thanks for moving it to today.
Hey, no problems, Frank. Glad to be here always.
For Aaron William Freeland, I'm Candid Frank Stanisci. Thank you for watching Leaf Talk, seen live on Fridays, Eastern Standard Time, normally 6 o'clock. The show can also be heard on the Spanglish World Radio Network. For Leaf Talk, other news, entertainment, and sports programming we offer, please check out SpanglishWorld.ca. Spanglish World. Watch it, hear it, read it, download it, and live it. And don't forget, Candid Frank Stanisci on YouTube. Until next time, have a great weekend, everybody. Enjoy the hockey game.